We continue with this. It's one of the big stories over the last day or so. The second phase of Operation Vulindlela being launched at the Union Buildings in Pretoria. This initiative is a collaboration between the Presidency and the National Treasury since 2020, and its aim is to drive structural reforms to create faster and inclusive economic growth. Building on phase one, this new phase has now been launched, and to discuss its goals and aspirations, we're joined by Rudi Dicks, who's the project manager for this in the Presidency. Rudi, good morning. As always, pleasure to have you on. Phase one of, I called it OV, right? I'm not sure it's going to take off, but I can only try. So OV, shorthand.
No, it is. We do have the shorthand. We absolutely call it OV. You got it spot on.
I thought I was being original, but Rudi, so Operation Vulindlela unlocking 500 billion rand. What's the single most impactful reform you can point to from that success?
Of that 500 billion, 390 to 400 billion is as a result of the reform that we've done in the electricity space, and particularly unlocking private sector investment in generation capacity that has helped us to reduce load shedding, and it helped us to be able to ensure that we secure generation capacity. That has been the biggest success, and that is because we changed the law. We allowed for private sector to invest in generation, but also use a transmission and distribution network. And in actual fact, we moved away from the model where Eskom would buy up all the energy, of course. And in this instance, we'd allowed private sector investors, for example, to use the network to be able to export the electricity to an off-taker. And that off-taker is not Eskom necessarily. That off-taker is a mine, a mall, or any other off-taker that requires to purchase that. That has been the most significant and the most impactful of that 500 billion.
All right. You've got, I think, 30 reforms in total, well, new reforms on the table. How do you ensure that implementation doesn't stall across departments and spheres of government as it often has in the past?
Yes. I mean, Imam, what we have done, Iman, is learn from phase one. Ours, of course, has always been that we are not the implementers. The implementers remains the entity or the departments that are specifically responsible for that. But our ability to, for example, coordinate, our ability to provide a centralizing coordination function, to be iterative, to push along, to ensure that we're able to hold accountable. Those are lessons that we've learned, hard lessons during phase one. We're going to tighten that up. We're going to ensure that there's high levels of accountability, speed in implementation. The new reforms are quite more complex, as you can well imagine. We're talking about local government, spatial inequality, and digital transformation. Digital transformation less so. So it is going to, we've got to acknowledge they're quite complex. But the fact of the matter is that we've got to do the changes, and we've got to hold people accountable and work together to ensure that that could be implemented.
And we'll circle back to accountability in just a moment, but you're also pushing for competitive electricity and water utilities at the local level. The question is, can struggling municipalities realistically meet this 2-year deadline to establish these ring-fenced, independently licensed entities?
It may not be the case for ordinary municipalities, but certainly we're going to have a discussion about that. The first phase of the ring-fence utility function for water and electricity is to focus on the metros, and I think that's more important. That's where it matters the most. So I think certainly that would be the case. And let's be clear about the ring-fence approach that we're talking about. We're not talking about simply not all funding or revenue raised by a distributor, for example, like City of Johannesburg, for instance, where we live in this side of the world. We're talking about the responsibility of the revenue that's been collected that is first and foremost going for OPEX, operational expenditure, for maintenance and CAPEX, right? Municipality as the shareholder of that, which is the City of Johannesburg, will continue to receive funding and surpluses as a result of that. What we've got to do is create efficiency. We've got to professionalize it. Ultimately, what the reform is about local government in creating these professional utilities is about ensuring service delivery and making and certainty about basic services that has to be delivered to citizens and to businesses in the municipality.
I think the way that you build credibility is really holding people accountable. And this question of the mechanisms, Rudi, that are in place to hold departments and metros accountable for failing to meet the reform targets under phase 2 is critical. So what does that look like?
It is a tricky one because remember what you have is spheres of government that has particular constitutional powers and legislative powers. Local government is one of that has quite well-defined constitutional powers, which is quite critical. We've had experience, for example, more recently, 2 initiatives that the president had announced: the eThekwini Presidential Working Group, an intervention specifically in eThekwini to deal with service delivery challenges, and a whole series of problems relating to service delivery. More recently, also, you've seen the president launch the Presidential Working Group for Johannesburg, for instance. There's, the idea of the way that we're working is not to develop a legislative implementation tool, which is using the legislation to force municipalities. We're actually applying the intergovernmental framework relations, which is a collaborative relations. It gives a reflection of us working together, all 3 spheres of government, to be able to achieve a set of objectives. It's worked pretty well. We got to ensure that we maintain and continue with the momentum. We got to hold people to account. We got to talk about timeframes. The level of accountability where people say, we're going to do this thing on an X date, and it just simply passes and no one is held or asked the question, why did you not achieve that? Those days, I think, are going to want to come to an end fairly soon. And I think our successes in eThekwini and our work that we're just starting now in Johannesburg is a useful learning curve on how we can work in a collaborative form through the intergovernmental relations framework by ensuring that we hold municipalities to account on specific actions that they've agreed to.
And we really do want to see that. I mean, it's not only a psychological boon, but it does shift the needle in terms of our growth. And I think the reforms that we've been discussing this morning are chasing growth of 3.5% in terms of GDP by 2029, which is just around the corner. In later conversations, Rudi, we'll keep tabs on some of the risks and some of the issues that you might encounter going forward, because certainly the nation would be invested on you achieving your strategic objectives. Rudi Dicks is the head of project management in the presidency, talking